Well, welcome to another session. I I am going to speak to today's general theme, which is finances. As today is a Friday, let me start with perhaps the following uh, caveats and overarching statements. When we talk about, and when I talk about finances, I am aware that finances come in several uh, pillars. You might be speaking about finances from a corporate finance perspective, or a personal finance perspective, or business finance, or family finance, or domestic finance. I'm speaking to you as the individual, and I guess more specifically, I'm speaking to you uh, as a friend. And my intention today is to lay out what I hope would be a building block of a series of conversations that will take place sometime in the future. Let me begin with the following. There are two ways, generally speaking, to manage your finances. Um, but first of all, it's important to understand that when we talk about finances, what we are talking about, generally speaking, is anything that involves the use of money. Whether that has to do with having your nails done, buying a new car, investing for the long term, renting an apartment, buying drinks at a bar. Any decision you make that involves the use of money or the allocation of resources has a financial component to it. And so it's important to understand that you cannot simply just push finances to one side and say, well, that's something that I will worry about sometime uh, in the future. When I began my journey of trying to understand how to design a financial future that allowed for financial freedom and financial security, I went through a period of trying to understand the best path to get me from where I was to where I was hoping to get to. That path um, is usually a path that each person has to choose explicitly or implicitly. In my case, I came to the decision that I wasn't smart enough and I was not wise enough to understand all of the decisions. And so I delegated some of my thinking uh, to others. And that does not mean I simply appointed people to make the decisions for me. That meant that I understood that I could make a simple decision of learning from experience, trading my time to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and correct my mistakes, and then move towards the path of returns. And alternatively, I found that an alternative approach was to understand how other successful people have created wealth, understand how other people have built a successful investment career, but more importantly, understand how some people made mistakes and what mistakes they made. That required some study. That study is a journey that I am still going through. And so I think the first message I'd like to leave with you is to understand that this is a journey of a lifetime. The concept of perpetual learning the concept that it is a moral duty to educate yourself every day is something that I'd like to recommend to you and commend you on if that's a path that you have chosen to take. In my experience and from my choices that I made, I found that learning from other people's experiences was much faster and certainly a less painful way of learning. Now, I talk about two ways of learning. One is called PE and the other is called OPE. The former stands for personal experiences. It simply means you can learn from your mistakes. Because when we succeed, we seldom learn as much as when we fail. When we succeed, we party, we celebrate. When we fail, we ponder, we go through introspections, we course correct, and we learn. So mistakes is a powerful way of learning. The latter way of learning is OPE, which stands for other people's experiences. And this means that through the process of vicarious learning, reading books, listening to seminars, attending workshops, perhaps conversing with people who are either more knowledgeable than you are and also willing to teach and also able to teach, you can learn things through their lived experiences that you do not need to make. Or let me rephrase that. You can learn things through their lived experiences by carefully selecting what worked and avoiding their failures. By combining other people's lived experiences and formulas that have worked, you can attach that to your lived experience in the present, and hopefully you're able to achieve a combined accelerated growth, and your results will be better than had you done it by trial and error. Learning through your personal experiences requires a lot of trial and error. Unfortunately, you have a finite life. You don't have all the time in the world. You're not Methuselah. You're not going to live until you're 969 years. And so you want to make the best you can with the little time you have and allow compound interest to work as an ally. And that's what I hope to begin these set of series on. Now, the first thing I learned was there are two ways of making money. Now, I generalize and I categorize all of them into two. Certainly, there are subcategories. The first category is where you work and earn. In this case, you exchange your time, your intelligence, you exchange your presence, your energy, you exchange your knowledge to create service or to create value for other people. And in exchange, they give you money as a compensation for the value you provide to them. This comes with what we call the law of compensation. In life, you and I are compensated based on the need for what we do, based on our ability to do such service exceptionally well, and finally, based on how easy it will be to replace you. So if you have a skill that is in short supply, that is in high demand, for which replacing you becomes hard, then you're more likely to command a higher wage, a higher compensation, or a higher bonus compared to other people. That is the first way of accumulating wealth. You exchange time or resources for money. The second way is where you take the residual value of what you have earned and you put that to work. You put that to work through what we call investment vehicles. Not through saving, but rather by allowing the money to grow through the process of compounding. We call this you putting your money to work. Those are the two ways fundamentally of making money or creating wealth. Interestingly, all of us, depending on who you are and where you live, we all have to combine both. Now, there are some people who are very fortunate and who have been blessed, who've perhaps won what I call the genetic lottery. You've been born into a family of means. Therefore, the need for you to work is perhaps much lower than the rest of us. And that simply means you already have wealth. Now, what this means overall is that in order to create wealth and manage your finances, you have to combine some aspect of working and some aspect of investing what you've earned through work. It's really that simple. How you do this is entirely up to you. I'll leave you with perhaps something to keep in mind as I bring today's session to a close. The wealth you create will be a combination of a few things. The first will be what I call your human capital. In addition to your human capital, you have to add what I call your financial investments. And then you also have to add real assets. And finally, your social capital. So, to manage your finances, you have to think about yourself, your network, which is your social capital, and your investments, and any hard or tangible real assets you generate. And let me go through that formula again, because I think it's important. Number one, your wealth will be an aggregation, a combination of your human capital and what you earn through that process, your financial investments, stocks, bonds, alternative assets, perhaps currencies and commodities that you have, and then real assets, gold, real estate or properties, and finally, your social capital. Social capital is one that most people, especially the younger you are, grossly underestimate. I believe very little time is spent investing in social capital. Perhaps at some point in the future, I will share how most of my gains in life and most of my achievements in life have come from my social capital, my network, my connections, the people I know and the people who trust me. But keep that formula in mind. You and I go through, and all of us will go through what I call a life cycle. We're born, we go through the process of growth, sometimes slow and then sometimes high. We get to a point in our lives where we become mature, and at some point, unfortunately, nature does what it does best. It starts to draw the curtains on the stage, so we step too slowly, deteriorate, and finally we die. That is a life cycle. It's no different from the life cycle of a business, and it's really no different from the life cycle of a country. All similar, but the time span varies between a human being's life, a company life, and a country's life. Now, what that simply means is that when you think about the human capital the financial investments, the real assets, and finally, your social capital, that as you transition from one phase of your life cycle to the next, the emphasis on a particular group would be more pronounced and the others may be less pronounced. Let me make it more concrete. You're 21 years old. You have been working for a year and a half. Certainly you graduated from university. Let's say you studied economics. You work in an accounting firm. The accumulated knowledge you have as a result of study and the little knowledge you have from a year and a half of work in the corporate world will aggregate to form your human capital. That will be tangible in the form of what you were paid per month. The net residue of what you take back or what you keep to yourself every month from what you get paid, we call that your savings. That is one aspect of your wealth. Depending on how, shrewd, clever, how much ingenuity you have, and depending on how much of a positive influence that you are receiving, you might be encouraged, or you may have found the encouragement to take your savings and put some of your savings into financial investments, stocks or bonds or alternative assets. And so it could also then mean that perhaps of all the money you saved and of all the net savings you have, say 10% of that has been put in financial assets and another 10% has been taken to allocate to perhaps buying a home in another savings pot. So what you find is that you have three pots. One is your savings pot. The second is your investment pot, but specifically financial investments. The third is another investment pot or a lifestyle pot. In the event you're trying to buy a home, it may not be an investment, it could be a lifestyle decision, but you have a third pot. Now, the fourth and the often less invested pot is usually the social capital pot. And this is where I would make an encouragement to you to be aware of the fact that your network, many a times, and depending on where you are in your life, will determine your overall net worth. So a certain amount of your money needs to be invested in the right mentors, the right coaches, the right association, going to events, building a connection with people who are like-minded, people who can inspire you, people who can challenge you, people who can educate or inform you, but people who can alert you to opportunities when they arise. Remember, you work in an accounting firm. You do not have the time to do all the study and find all the opportunities. So sometimes you need to rely on other people bringing back the news to you or pulling you into a deal. Someone saying to you, I found a good deal. There are 4 of us who are already in the deal. We've observed you for a while. We think you have potential. Yeah. We would like you to join and be a partner. That comes from your social capital. The aggregation of all the 4 baskets over a long period of time creates your net worth and creates your wealth. And more importantly, decides whether you become financially independent or financially free. It's really that simple. Now, I should say something also. When you're 21, it's very hard, or when you're 18 or 19 or 17, it's very, 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 very hard to imagine what the future could look like. It's not unusual to be very optimistic about what your future will be and how successful you will be. And I wish you all the success that you can muster. But we know that in every society, at the end of every working life, after some people have worked for 50 years, only about 5% of the entire population can have a claim that there is nothing out there, whether that be forces within or forces without, that are controlling their financial destiny. Only about 5% of people are financially free, financially independent, and wealthy. And what that simply means, that most people, unfortunately, miss the mark. There is some luck involved, but there is planning. Those who have a plan get to the end and they achieve their goals. So, whilst you're still young, it's not unusual to think that such decisions are for the future. My role is to remind you that you have to treat your future self as though you're worthy of being brought into the decisions that are being made by your present self with regards to spending your money, to ensure that your future self is not disappointed by your present self sometime in the future. Now, what this simply means is, for those of you who simply think, I will earn my way to success, or I will work my way to success, recognize that seldom is wealth created through employment. If you want to create wealth, you have to think about the word deployment. Those who are employed, you might be a high earning employer or employee, apologies for that, but seldom do people create wealth through employment. Because what tends to happen is, as our income increases, we tend to increase our standard of living to the point where we tend to spend almost all of what we earn, and sometimes more. And this is the reason why, if you do not have a plan and you're not disciplined, you find someone who earns £1,000 per month spends the entire £1,000 each month. And he says, well, what do you expect? I only earn £1,000 per month. 7 years down the line, 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, he earns £15,000 per month. And he says, well, look at all of the cars, the houses, the children, the wife, the shoes I have. I can't afford to save. So he spends £15,000 per month. In other words, it's not what you earn that matters. It's really what you keep and the discipline you instill in your actions to ensure that your future self is provided for and that your current present self is put through what I call the chains of delayed gratification. So employment is one way. This is where human capital comes in. You exchange what you have for something in return. That is employment. Deployment is where you take the talents, the knowledge, the expertise, the opportunities you've come across. You blend it with ingenuity, entrepreneurship, the willingness to take risks, and you send that bird out to get more or to find some treasure for you. So you deploy yourself by investing some of your personal time in starting a side business, in starting an online business, so that whilst you're sleeping money is working for you. You've taken some of your savings, you put such savings in an investment account. You've taken some of your savings, you put such savings in a property investment or some form of real estate, and that is working for you. That is deployment. That is you taking your resources and allowing your resources to be deployed. Now, when your resources are sat in a savings account, they are not deployed. Your resources have to be sent out like a hunting bird or a hunting dog to go fetch treasures. That is when deployment begins. Deployment begins when you start a business, you employ other people, they work for you. So what I'm trying to say is the first way of creating wealth is to understand that you exchange your time for money. The second way, and the wiser way, and the path to wealth is where you have money working for you. Because at some point in that life cycle, who knows? Yours might be 65 years, yours could be 75 years. For some people, it's 30 years. If you were a miner, yours could be 32 years. If you're a football player, who knows, it could be 40 years. If you are in the military, it could be less. If you are a professional athlete, it could be less. But at some point, you will find that you've come to the end of your ability to exchange your talents, your physical ability, your knowledge, in exchange for money. And if you have not before then deployed your wealth or deployed your abilities, your talents, your skills, then there is a possibility that you will find in the future that you do not have enough to sustain you. Now, I hope today's session has been useful. I'd like you to go away with an assignment, a task, if you want to call that a take-home task. I'd like you to sit down with a blank piece of paper, and I'd like you to, on that piece of paper, draw a large square. Split that square into two halves. So the middle of what I call the top section of the line and the left section of the line. So effectively what you create are 4 new boxes, 4 new squares. In the top left, I'd like you to put your assets, just put A or assets. In the right, put L or liabilities. In the bottom section, put I, which means your income. And in the right bottom section, put E, which is your expenses. What you've created is what I call a very, very simple form of a financial statement. It captures what you own, which is what we call your balance sheet, what you own and what you owe. And if you add the two of them, it gives you your net worth or your net present value. And at the bottom, you have what we call your income statement, which is how much you earn and how much you spend. By combining both, what you have is a system of flow of money. We call that cash flow. In business, in a financial statement, you have 3 sets of documents: your income statement, your balance sheet, and your statement of cash flow. The statement of cash flow simply identifies how money flows into your life and where money flows out of your life. That is the first assignment for you. Now, I'm not asking you to populate this document just yet. The reason I have given you that assignment is because words create divine interventions. There is a correlation between the words you know and your future success. The more words you know, the higher the curiosity, inquisitiveness, and potential eagerness that you might have to explore new and better things. So I have simply given you some new words. By writing down those words, I hope I have inspired you to do some research and understand what those words mean. Make no mistake, this is not an entertainment channel where I guess make you happy. My hope and my intention is to challenge you, to inspire you, to provoke you, to inform you, to leave you with insights that cause you to be, to always leave with more knowledge than when you came. And that means, whilst I work, I expect you to work just as hard. So, with the words that I have shared on that piece of paper, put a question mark against whichever word perhaps you are not really familiar with. And my hope is that you pull out a dictionary, you go on the internet and you research, so that when I come back to another session of finances, maybe I will see questions from you, or maybe you will find that perhaps you're one step ahead of me in my explanations, which is my hope, that at some point you know much more than I do. And I hope that this has been quite useful.